Today we are honored to have with us at this 25th anniversary celebration of the founding of the University of Massachusetts at Boston a number of distinguished guests who in 1964 were those most responsible for the legislation which formally established the University of Massachusetts at Boston, and for the planning which led to the registration of the first class of students at the University of Massachusetts at Boston in September of 1965. These dear friends of the university have agreed to share their recollections of those exciting days with us. They are Dr. John Lederle, who as 16th president of the University of Massachusetts first signaled the need to locate a branch of the University of Massachusetts in Boston to accommodate the growing number of students in eastern Massachusetts who needed the services of an urban public university. The Honorable Maurice A. Donahue, who as president of the Massachusetts Senate, joined in the call for the establishment of a University of Massachusetts in the greater Boston area. The Honorable Robert H. Quinn, who as Majority Whip and representative from the Dorchester area, co-sponsored the bill to establish UMass Boston. Mr. Quinn went on to become Speaker of the House, Attorney General, and Chairman of the Board of Trustees of the University of Massachusetts. Indeed, the building we are in today is named in his honor. Senator Donahue and Representative Quinn were joined by Senator George V. Kenneally in sponsoring the UMass Boston bill. Senator Kenneally also served with distinction in the Massachusetts House of Representatives. Dr. Leo F. Redfern served as Dean of Administration at the University of Massachusetts and ably chaired the task force which prepared and refined the first plans for the University of Massachusetts at Boston, dealing with issues ranging from the hiring of faculty to the printing of catalogs and everything else in between, which bring the heart and soul to an institution. Dr. Alexander Cella, who served as legal counsel to a succession of House speakers, including Speaker Quinn, and also served as legal counsel to Senate President Maurice Donahue. And of course, Governor Endicott Peabody, who was governor of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, signed on June 18, 1964, the legislation establishing the University of Massachusetts in Boston. I would also like to invite Mr. Martin Nolan of the Boston Globe, Mr. Peter Lucas of the Boston Herald, and Mr. Ian Menzies of the McCormick Institute here, all distinguished journalists and veteran observers of the Boston scene, to join in this discussion. It's now my pleasure to turn the program over to Professor Thomas Brown, recently retired from the UMass Boston History Department, who, as chairman of the 25th Anniversary Committee, will moderate our discussion. Dr. Brown.
Thank you, Chancellor Penny. I would like, if I may, just to say a few words in addition about this 25th anniversary celebration. It comes, and I needn't emphasize this, it comes at a very difficult time for this institution, and indeed for all academic institutions in the state. The high promise set forth in the legislation of '64 now is in some measure menaced, placed in jeopardy. And I think we ought to extend a particular kind of praise, a particular kind of enthusiasm to Chancellor Penny for initiating and encouraging a celebration of the 25th anniversary of this institution. It represents, on her part, and I think she speaks for all of us here at the university, it represents an affirmation of faith in the future, an affirmation of faith that despite the present difficulties and troubles, the university will survive, and in the words of the Nobel laureate, will in due time triumph. So, with these words out of the way, let me then turn to the particular concerns that we have here this afternoon. That is to say, a sharing of memories of the founding of this institution, and most particularly a sharing of memories having to do with the enabling legislation that established this institution. And I would like, as moderator, I would like to follow the pattern suggested by the introduction of the Chancellor. That is to say, to begin with President Lederle. And let me interject here that in the 25 years, some of us have grown old in years, if not in wisdom. But President Lederle, as I remember him from 25 years ago, seems utterly unchanged. He looks very much like the figure that we see here in the portrait.
He looks younger.
He looks younger, yes, right, absolutely, yes. He's grown young as we've grown old, yes. I'd like to follow that pattern of beginning with President Lederle and then to turn to the gentleman who served in the legislature, who encouraged and moved the enabling legislation, then turn to the governor, Governor Peabody, and then to those such as Mr. Cella and Leo Redfern, who were engaged in activities fundamental to the successes of those years of 64 and 65. So, President Lederle, if I may, I would turn to you for what comments you might like to make as to the founding of this institution, and particularly that legislation of 64.
Well, on the legislation, I think we will talk to our legislators and the governor. When I arrived here in 1960 from the University of Michigan in Ann Arbor, I very quickly discovered that this state had underappropriated for public higher education over the years. We had the usual number of candidates for college, but the private institutions, of which we're very proud, were now reducing their in-state enrollments. As I used to say on the banquet circuit, if you want to go to Harvard or to Amherst or to Williams, you'd better move to New Mexico. Your boy will have a better chance of getting in. Also, you can only increase a single institution at a certain rate. We, by the end of my time, were expanding at Amherst at a rate of 1,500 students a year. This is more than an Amherst college. Again, I used to kid a little bit about it. Amherst College at that time was groaning and straining and going to add 200 students to its 1,000 students in the next 10 years. And we were faced with a situation, and we were the public university. And I also noticed that while we couldn't take them all in Amherst, that Boston was, to my knowledge, the only big city in America that didn't have a high-quality public university. And yet they had all the people that needed that kind of education. So within 6 months, I began promoting with my friends. I can remember one time talking to Bob Quinn when he was majority floor leader of the House at the time, when he was at our house in Amherst, about having a Boston campus of the university. I talked to a good many others. Some of them had this idea on their own, I'm sure, and were promoting it on their own. So eventually we got to the point where we got this into legislation. Maurice Donahue, Bob Quinn, various other legislators promoted it, and I was very pleased that the bill went through rapidly. The next thing I remember was the horrendous problem of taking care. We promised 1,000 students in some quarters in Boston within the following year. And we had to look for space. We began recruiting faculty and recruiting students, not even knowing where their classes were to be. We had the horrendous problems of getting through the legislature and then getting the Bureau of Building and Construction to rebuild the gas company building, which was our first building. And then we had the further problem, and I got admonished for the slowness with which it occurred, of looking for a permanent site for UMass Boston. I found that as far as the city was concerned, it couldn't care less whether it had a university. I talked to Ed Logue, who was then the not MBTA, but the redevelopment agent, and then to Hale Champion, and each time we ran in to sites that were not promotable. We had, for a while, we were considering a ribbon strip university sited on the clover leaf at the Prudential Center, and I suggested that while I didn't like this site, maybe we would put students on roller coasters or something and build this thing up and down the turnpike. It got to the point finally where we discovered that the only thing we could get, since you couldn't use urban renewal anymore as had been done at Chicago Circle or at Wayne State or at Temple, the only thing you could do would be to pick an old dump, and they began to look more and more attractive. We came out and we looked at Boston College High School, and that seemed to be sinking. There were some legislators who said that you couldn't build on this site. We made studies of the site and came to the conclusion that this was where we ought to be in terms of having enough space to build the conglomerate that a university is. It's got to have a certain critical mass. Can't be scattered all around a city in single buildings because you can't rub off on each other, either as students or as professors, under those circumstances. And then I can remember after we had picked the site, there was a certain amount of objection to it that it still was going to sink, but it is now here, and it seems to me that we ought to be very proud of the physical plant that exists. But I would concur with what our chairman has just suggested, that we've got to have money, and the kids of Boston who come to this institution deserve appropriate subsidization of their educations. We want a high-quality, low-tuition public university, and we need the money to support it.
Well, let me, if I may, point out as a faculty member in those early years occupying the gas company, let me point out that there were many people who said the appropriate place for any academic institution is an old gas building. I should now like to turn to Maurice and see if he would tell us some of his reflections on all of this.
Well, when you get old, it's hard to go that far back down memory lane, I suppose. But I remember being invited to speak at a communion breakfast up at the Newman Center. And I realized that this was not going to be the typical communion breakfast situation where I could use one of my 3 or 4 pet communion breakfast speeches, and doing what most good Pauls would do, I went to a speechwriter extraordinaire by the name of Dr. Dan O'Leary, who was the president of Lowell State, and I told him that there were going to be plenty of Protestants and Jewish faculty members at this breakfast, so we wanted something ecumenical that would stir the multitude. And he certainly did. And we advocated the establishment of a University of Mass in Boston, and the response was so great that morning that I couldn't wait to get back to the State House the next day and contact an old and valued friend of mine who had begged me in those days to make him chairman of the Committee on Taxation, and to tell him that this thing was going to go through, that there was going to be a university in Boston, and that coming from Boston, he better get his name on the bill immediately. He might be one of the best Pauls that I ever met. It's my good friend George. And immediately he said, well, we've got to get this through the House. And he had a young friend there who he thought was marked for greatness. And within 5 minutes, future Speaker Quinn was the third signee on the bill, and we put it through, and it was almost like naming a bridge for somebody. It was that easy because the need was there. I think that the biggest problem connected with it was that there was a lovely educator in Boston by the name of Dr. Dooley, who was the president of Boston State. Looney. And he wanted the university to come to Boston, but he wanted it to become Boston State so that he'd get to be president of the university. And there are times that you have to make decisions, and he was just too old to handle something like that. And besides that, we had statistics by this time from Dr. Redfern and a few others to show that Boston State could still keep as many students as they had, and there was still a need for a University of Mass at Boston. So without having Boston State become a part of it at that time, the progress was, so fast that, and the legislature at that time knew how far you could go, and one of the things that you couldn't do was certainly pick a site. It was like medical school later on. If you wanted to pick a site for the medical school, you'd have to have 40 medical schools in the Senate. Because nobody wanted it, but everybody wanted it in their district if you're going to have it. Well, there was a big argument in Boston, but the Boston boys and the legislature left it up to the administration and to the Board of Trustees, and probably some people thought that it took a little while, but it was a fine decision, and now we've got a great urban university spawning here. But I think that this 25th anniversary has got to be a lot more than saying thank you to people for establishing a university. If 2 or 3 more years go by, like the last 2 or 3, you're going to have a requiem for UMass Boston and Amherst. And if something isn't done to keep it moving ahead, the urban students of the future are not going to have the opportunity that the kids have that are here now. And I think that one of the slogans we might use is don't let them take it away. Because in the last 3 or 4 years, there's been more harm done to public higher education in Massachusetts through lack of funding than has been done the 25 years before that with the good that's going on. And it's okay to have tributes paid to great guys like Trustee Crowley and all of those people who were dying and fought the good fight. But there are people here now that need to be educated. And we've heard the old cliche 1,000 times that the only natural resource we have here in Massachusetts are our kids. Well, we've got to give them that shot at higher education. You're talking about breaking out of the ghetto, you're not going to do it without education. I think one of the great people that supported this university worked for the university for a number of years after his productive years as a Jebby were over with, and that was Father Mike Walsh. And I used to spend an hour or two with him every day that he was in the office in downtown Boston. And in his mind, this was what BC was going to be until the tuitions went up. And that no longer can all of the young Irish kids think they're going to go to BC because you're talking about $19,000 tuitions, or the young Italian basketball or football players. But you've got to find an education at a low cost that still gives high quality. We found it here, and don't let them take it away.
Will the senator yield?
Bravo.
You should still be in the Senate.
Yes.
In charge.
Terrific rundown of the problem, which you overcame, and the problems that exist, and you may get us all moving.
That was because we had you there to sign all these big bills, Governor.
George, you want to add to this? Or detract from it?
Myself?
Yes?
Nobody adds to Morris.
Bravo.
Morris is absolutely right. We went through this period. I come from Boston. I still live here. I feel extremely proud of this institution. One of the reasons I have 2 graduates, or I have 1 graduate and 1 who is attending this school. He's done already 3 years in the Army, and he's here now studying Japanese, among other subjects, because he's been to Japan, he's been all over the Pacific, and he wants to go into that field and go out that way and start to live. And he's getting his education in his languages right here in this school. I don't know whether you could get Japanese, say, at BU. I assume you could get it at Harvard, but you probably wouldn't get it at BC, and I'm not finding fault with it. I think it's a subject a subject that many people could utilize in America today. The Japs all know English. I just find it, I went to Russia last year, and how they've advanced. They haven't advanced as far, they're back in the 20s as far as I'm concerned, where I was born in the 20s. And they're living in their food and their establishments that they live in. Can't touch the living standards that we have in America. No matter where you live, no matter what color you are, we in America are leading the world. But they're teaching their youngsters English. Up to the age of 12, everybody speaks English because they insisted on it. This is what I think we're missing in America today, is broadening the education of our students. This school has helped we, those of us that come from the core city, to benefit and better ourselves. And I think we're doing it for a large number of people who probably would never have gotten it otherwise. I'm talking about poor people, no matter whether they're black or Hispanic or Irish or Italian. They can go to this school, and we shouldn't be cutting back on education. Well, we won't get into the politics of things. I was going to give somebody a little dash.
Give him a dash.
But truthfully, over the years, we remember how this all started. And I can remember fighting with Bob Quinn or with Maurice about what to do with Boston State College and how we could put this make that the university. And Dr. Lederle explained that fully to us. So it wasn't a choice, and I happen to like those men that ran that school. And I knew them well. I grew up with, well, my father did, with them. We had in this institution, the idea of this institution, a great one, a great idea, something that would expand the educational qualifications of the poor people, not the ones that could go to Harvard or Boston College or BU. And I'm not picking on those fellas. We've had our fights over the years. But truthfully, this school, and I can remember all of the little funny things we had about the site and all that. We went through that with Bob Quinn. And this is his district. This is his ward. I was in the next ward, 16. I'm still there. He's moved. He's moved to my district, Milton. And remember, we fought, Bob, over whether we put it at the Wollaston Golf Course site, which was then going to move, or put it here. And we all did finally very much agree to this location. And I'm proud of this school and the people that ran it, all of them. You know, Dr. Galino and my dear friend, Dr. Ryan, John Ryan. It would be so proud of this, just this little meeting today. People over the years have seen, I have 3 doctors in my family. My children have got doctorate degrees, and I have my son that I'm so proud of here in this school now. And I've watched them. Cella knows them all. I mean, we're all doctors around this table. Even this school gave me one, made me a doctor, and I'm proud of it. And so we hope that in the future this is going to be a much more expanded, and I just hope that that situation will change, where the money will become freer for us to keep this kind of education going for those who really need it and deserve it. America has changed. 30 years ago, hardly anyone graduated from college. Or 40 years ago, nobody graduated from college, except the Donahues with big money and went to Holy Cross. Now everyone gets a bachelor's degree, and you know as well as I that you have to have a master's at least in order to make ends meet in today's America. And I don't find any fault with it. I think that we talk about difficulties, and we're going into a very difficult depression area. But the one thing that can pull us out of it in America is the education of our young and making it a better nation and that much more competitive over all of the countries of the world. And believe me, go to Russia and see what they're doing. They're doing it in education. No, it wasn't a junket. I had to pay my way. It wasn't a junket. It was an exceptionally wonderful visit to go there and see what their educational qualities, because the boxing that we went with, the team that I went with, boxed in the various schools in Moscow and Leningrad and over in Czechoslovakia. I think that this school epitomizes what all of us, as we grew up, understood what education was about, and how we can make a better nation for it. And I think those of us that were started out in this whole idea of this school, and I know about the old Boston Gas Company. I was a graduate of the Boston Consolidated Gas Company. We called it Consecrated. I read meters for them while I ran for office and went to college nights and law school nights. And I remember and respectfully and really want to salute of all of us here at the table, the man who wasn't even a question that he'd signed the bill. Was never a question at all. And he deserves all the credit for what we did 30 years ago. Governor Peabody.
Hey,
Thank you.
Senator leaving aside that what you said about the master's education are said much more colorfully, dramatically, and usefully than what President James Conant said when I was a student at Harvard about the necessity for a master's education or a graduate degree for all people. And here, a leading politician in Massachusetts is saying most effectively what he could only say dryly.
Yeah, but he wrote George's stuff.
Can I jump in for a moment as a member of the Fourth State to answer my good friend George Kenneally? You know, I did go to Boston University and I graduated in 1960. There were two reasons why I went to Boston University. One is because there was no University of Massachusetts when I got out of high school. Certainly there was no UMass Boston. There was no state college system. And in about 1953, when I did drive out to Amherst to look into the University of Massachusetts, I found out that it was an agricultural school. They had farms, and they taught growing cows. And it was not the type of education I had in mind. The other reason is, in order to go to college, I had to go into the Army during the Korean War to get the GI Bill, because there was no state aid in those days, and that was the only way I could have gone to college. And I was lucky enough to become a reporter, which is what I wanted to do.
That's luck.
And being on hand, Governor Peabody signed that bill into law. I worked for the old Boston Traveler then. And even though Chuck Peabody campaigned for re-election that year, having passed 97% of his legislative program, he was defeated. But on that day he signed that bill, I don't think anyone, myself included, would have dreamed that the university that was planned at that time would grow into the institution you have here now. I thought, that the end result would be that Boston Consolidated Gas Building, and that would be that, and that the Commonwealth would pay lip service to the idea of a university in Boston and keep pouring money into Amherst. And so I, for one, am very surprised that it grew into the marvelous institution it has grown into. And it reminds me that there are times when you witness something and you have no idea what the end result is going to be. And I think that was when Chuck Peabody signed his bill into law.
Thank you. Yeah. As I listen to these remarks, it seems clear to me that there was quite a consensus around the need for the institution in '64 and in '65, even though its full growth was not anticipated. What is also clear is that there was a most terrific fight over the location, over the site. And I suggest that we might have another session fully devoted to the site question. I think we could get Hollywood interested in that.
Well, I think one thing you have to realize that, yes, they fought amongst ourselves about where to put it. Some wanted West Roxbury, if you're from West Roxbury. But the key was, we wanted the school right here. That was the main thing. Someplace in Boston where they could all reach.
Should we have that session, George, devoted exclusively to the site, I would report on the terrific fights that took place within the faculty.
Oh, beautiful, beautiful.
Yeah.
Silent crowd.
And of how many faculty members died of heart attacks in the middle of it. Bob, I'd like to...
measure of the skill of the legislators at that time is how adroitly they passed that decision under the Board of Trustees.
Of course.
Very deft.
As long as we had our finger in it.
I'd like to turn to Bob now, to Bob Quinn, who participated in that enabling legislation and then later and most recently served in a most distinguished way as chairman of the Board of Trustees. Appropriately, this building in which we now are having this session is named after Robert Quinn.
Thank you, Tom. And I think Al Cella will agree with me. The Senate has kicked it all around, and now the House will tidy it up.
That's what we thought.
I'm thrilled to be here. The point that hits me most immediately, with all due respect to the wonderful people that are here from other persuasions, is that there are 5 politicians here, those who had run for office and had served in the legislature or as governor at the time that this bill was passed. Those 5 people were friends and friendly with one another then, continue to be so now, and I dare say enjoy one another's company immensely whenever they get the opportunity to be together. Maybe there's a message in all that of how things got through. I do know that, or I do esteem the fact that when I was Speaker of the House for the short period that I was able to serve with President Maurice Donahue, that was the best time the Democratic legislature ever had, because we never had an argument that lasted beyond 24 hours. And George said we had a lot of fights. We sure did have a lot of fights, but we never let them get in the way of our sociability and our friendliness, and we resolved them. And however they were resolved, one side or the other one, it was always the right way they were resolved. There are 3 parts of what I would like to say here in my reminiscences. One is my recollections of having gracious invitations from Dr. and Mrs. Lederle to go to the President's Home, which is what he was then, of the University of Massachusetts at Amherst. And I had occasion to be invited to stay overnight, I think, or maybe I didn't get the invitation, but I did, whether they liked it or not. And I remember insisting that every time I asked, I found out that the great majority of the students at the University at Amherst came from what they always said is the greater Boston area. And then I said, yeah, but how many from Boston? I said, what you have to do is be where they can take advantage of this great opportunity, they being the students in Boston, like myself, but I was beyond that. And I used to keep insisting, and Dr. Lederle used to keep smiling, and I thought he was paying no attention. He had better thoughts and better plans than I had ever contemplated, because sure enough, he came up with the idea that there ought to be a University of Massachusetts in the Boston area, and that was that. By the way, I talked about the sociability of us 5 politicians. We, all of us, were keenly involved and instrumental in establishing a university at Boston. We are all privately educated. We are graduates of schools of higher private education, not public education, but we cared, and nothing got in the way of our concern for the opportunity for these young people. And so it was in my reminiscences that I think I was whip of the house at the time, and I had the gavel, and I was presiding at a session of the legislature when our dear friend, the late, great John Forbes Thompson, was Speaker of the House of Representatives, and his counsel came out and said, some people want to talk to you, some folks from UMass. Al Cella had asked me if I'd talk, and I think I talked on the rostrum to Judge Fox. I don't know whether he was a trustee then or not, but he always thought he was a trustee, and he still thinks he's a trustee. I think Bob Gordon was there, your good friend, Governor, and I think Leo was there. And they came up, and Foxy said, Donahue and Kenneally have filed a bill to establish the University of Mass at Boston. They think there ought to be a House member involved, and they suggested you. I said, well, it damn well better be a House member involved, and it's nice they suggested me, or I would hit them over the head if they didn't. So I had the honor to join in the sponsorship of this legislation, about which I had dreamed, but really never had the conviction that someone someday would seriously say, let's do it. And it was said at the instigation of Dr. Lederle to Maurice, and Maurice went on with it, and George, and I had the honor to be a part of it and to see that legislation go whipping through, probably from the comradeship and the similarity of interests of those of us who wanted to see this established. John Lederle, someone has mentioned it before, but you sent down an aide-de-camp, a poor scruffy guy named Ryan who didn't appear to know what was going on. He had such thick glasses, and John Ryan twirled us all around his finger and made sure, while he had people sympathetic in high position, like myself and George and Maurice and John Thompson, who was always great for higher public education, made sure that he had as much money as he needed to get going and get that university started, because he believed then, as I did then and as I do now, that there were so many lying in the wings waiting to do it dirt that if it didn't get started, it would never get started. And sure enough, the gas company building, the abandoned gas company building, was found and set up as the campus, and immediately there was a convocation and an installation of the chancellor in the person of Dr. Ryan, and things got going, and we did have that university at Boston going. It was a thrilling experience. It was wonderful. I had the chance to participate because as others were moving on, I was moving up, and weren't those happy days. Which gets me to the next part of what I consider, because it is the location, and I'll be happy to do this again, because after all, the university is located in beautiful Ward 13, Precinct 10 then, now Precinct 3, I think, Martin.
You don't know your precinct?
I don't need to know them anymore. But it was in Ward 13 that it was located, and I remember, you're right, whoever said it, I think it was Tom Brown, that Al Cella was counsel to many speakers, and this one included. I had the honor to work with Al, and I always wrote my own speeches, unlike President Donahue and George Kenneally. But Al happened to have put together a beautiful speech for me when I was sworn in 1968 as Speaker of the House of Representatives. And the theme of it was, I intend to be an urban speaker. Because I had come from the city of Boston, I was a part of the big city of the Commonwealth. Problems of the city were rife then, and even the federal government was recognizing it. And Al had given me that theme, and I delivered what I thought was a tremendous speech. I intend to be an urban speaker. Part and parcel of that, of course, was the establishment of the university at Boston and the finding of a permanent location. And I would be constantly advised by Alexander what was going on with the location of University of Massachusetts, and I was concerned very much that the trustees had been taking so long, as I'm sure we all were concerned, including the trustees, because there were simply too many occasions for this wonderful opportunity of education to fall between the cracks. Somebody mentioned a fellow named Logue. He had a boss named Collins, whom I esteemed very highly, but John Collins could not care less about public higher education, would just as soon see the University of Massachusetts disappear. I think that's a safe statement. And the governor of the Commonwealth unfortunately ceased to be Endicott Peabody and was John Volpe, and I think John Volpe shared very much the sympathies of Mayor Collins that we shouldn't be spending so much money on higher public education, and therefore he would like to see the university at Boston slip away. More and more it concerned us that there ought to be a UMass Boston, and there were suggestions of Wilmington, Watertown, Quincy, and other locations, and I happen to have a rather powerful gavel, and what makes those people I haven't called politicians so political is that they know where the strength is, and I had a little bit of strength that time, and I said it's going to be in Boston, I don't care where. I think it was to Joe Healy I used to say this. I don't care where, you pick it, but it's going to be in Boston where those poor kids can trip over it. Those young Irish kids, no matter what color or dialect of language they had, they were going to trip over it and know an opportunity for education existed and maybe say, I think I'll take it up. And there were battles going back and forth and tugs and pulls, but one thing I was ready to fight the trustees on and the administration on was that it should not be in the suburbs, because suburban opportunities existed enough. And after all, as Alexander Cella told me, I am an urban speaker.
Here, here.
So it devolved that the developments around the Prue, where that Copley place is now, I remember the Cathedral of the Holy Cross was a possibility. The Cardinal was ready to throw in the sponge there. God bless him and give it all to us if we'd find another place for him. I think we couldn't find another place short of heaven for Cardinal Cushing, so that was that. And several other locations, but constantly it turned around to the place nobody else wanted, Columbia Point. Nobody else except the rep in the district who happened to be Speaker of the House. So I urged it upon the trustees to pick a place, and if they didn't, I was ready to legislate Columbia Point. They did pick a place. They picked Columbia Point. I think in spite of all the criticisms that occurred and the shortcomings that might exist now regarding how to get here and traffic snarls, which was it Ian Menzies who said they exist everywhere in Boston? In spite of all that, this has become a tremendous location. It's an in-city location out of the city. It has a lot of beauty in the scenery around it. One can even look to Ward 16, where George Kenneally originates, and also to Ward 13, where Bob Quinn had the privilege to grow up. And this has become a wonderful campus. I can remember my last speech in the House of Representatives because too soon I left that place to pick up some lawyer's job in the state. And I thanked the legislators who had given me that opportunity, but I did make to them one request. I said, please, whatever you do, please put enough money in the budget to get the University of Massachusetts at Boston going. They did. They put, I don't know, $360 million, I guess, to get the first buildings going. And they did get going out here in the 70s, and we have this wonderful campus. I can only share the concern of President Donahue and Dr. Lederle and George Kenneally and the governor that it has to continue that way. I've given Chancellor Penny some of my ideas on how I think it should continue that way, or it may be lobbied to continue that way. But I would urge upon any of those who have a public voice and are heard with respect by people to do their best to convince government leaders and to convince the business leaders in the community that the University of Massachusetts at Boston is an opportunity not merely for the students who go here, but for all of Boston itself, because it's going to provide that leadership, which, as Father Walsh said, isn't provided at Boston College anymore, isn't provided at so many of our public institutions anymore, because they've been priced beyond the availability of so many young people. But University of Massachusetts at Boston is there to provide the opportunity, both at price and at location and at time opportunities. So I hope that all of you who can speak out will be able to persuade public officials that the best investment that can be made with the short dollars that we might have is going to be in the continuation of the University at Boston.
Thank you.
And that's it.
That's a great statement. I'd like to make one remark. I'm glad you brought in a reference to the speaker, John Forbes Thompson.
An awful man.
What a power. And what a beautiful politician. I often used to say that all his brains were in his guts, because he immediately had a reaction, and is generally an excellent reaction to the possibility or the advisability of legislation. And with those brains, he picked Al Cella, whose brains were in his head, to work together, and it was a great combination.
A large size head it is.
Governor, you want to speak further on? You want to tell us some of your own reactions to this legislation or this experience of '64?
I'd be very happy to, Professor Brown. And Chancellor Penny, I thank you for bringing this all together here today, because this is a reunion of those who sweated and toiled for the University of Massachusetts, and the University of Massachusetts, particularly at Boston. I can recall in my early political days, when I was a governor's counselor in 1954, when I believe the name of the University of Massachusetts was put on the University of, what was it, Mass Aggies at that time.
College.
And while I didn't have a vote in the legislature, Sumner Kaplan and Al Cella got me out there in the lobby, and we worked away to see that UMass was created, and it also had the funds to make it a university. So my commitment to public education in Massachusetts was an early one. Of course, I had a long relationship with Maurice Donahue, then a state senator. He was the leader of the Stevenson for President forces here in Massachusetts, and that was a difficult campaign.
Another winner.
But that's what brought me into politics, and so anything he stood for, I knew was pretty good. And at any rate, when the opportunity came for me to run for governor, I wanted to reach out for the educational community and those who believed in public education. And I asked Bob Gordon, who was an alumnus, if he'd be a liaison with the University of Massachusetts community. And indeed he was an excellent one, and the resources of the university were available to me as they were to any public servant, but we took advantage of them. And to everyone's surprise, including partly my own, we were elected by 1 vote per precinct in 1962, which is not many votes, if you can remember. As a matter of fact, it was Holyoke that made the difference when they cast the vote wrong at that time. Well, there I was as governor, and what was my program going to be? Well, Bill Waldron was my commissioner of administration. He already started working on the budget, and we did not know we were in a rising tide at that time, and things were awfully close and tight. But I said, look, Bill, if there's anything I want to emphasize in my administration, it's public education. So let's squeeze some money out, if there is any, and put it into the University of Massachusetts. And that we did in our budget immediately. Even before I took office, we had those plans in session, in action. And that didn't just extend to the University of Massachusetts, of course, it extended to the whole public education spectrum, including Southeastern Mass University, which was just getting started, the community colleges, which Governor Ferklow had done so much to start, and the state colleges, which needed a great deal of strengthening. And as a result of this interest, we began to see things begin to move. And I remember my inaugural address, which we planned very carefully. I said to the Great and General Court, I want to make this a partnership for progress. And of course, I meant a partnership for my programs. And they took me quite literally and understood it to be a partnership for their programs. And indeed, that's the result of our administration. It was a great partnership, and those who were interested in developing programs to benefit the Commonwealth found good allies in either branch of government. Well, I soon got to know President Lederle because as governor, I was a member of the Board of Trustees, and I took those duties very seriously. And I went out to Amherst on more than one occasion, and fortunately his wife Angie was a horseback rider, as I was, and we happened to use the horses at UMass a lot together, and I became very fond of the place in addition to my interest in education. And our program was going very well indeed. I recall, however, one weekend that out of the blue came this proposal from Maurice Donahue that we should create the University of Massachusetts of Boston. And as he refreshes my memory, it was on a weekend that he made the speech, and on Monday I was asked by the press what I thought of it. Well, Maurice and I had worked together very long ago. He didn't tell me about this proposal in advance, maybe for my own good. But in any event, while we were squeezed on budget, I knew that that was some program that I could only get in back of. That would be unthinkable to do the reverse, notwithstanding the fact they were concerned about funds. And as you all remember, despite our increase in appropriations, there was only one tax increase during my administration, and that was a 1-cent cigarette tax to fund the transportation bill. And Mayor Ryan of Springfield took such umbrage about that because Springfield didn't benefit, that I lost a number of votes when it came to that important primary that Peter Lucas was talking about. But what's the phrase? All good deeds are soon remembered, one way or another. In any event, as far as the transportation bill is concerned, as Bob Quinn and George Kenneally have been narrating along with Senator Donahue, that went through the House and the Senate because there was a universal support for that idea. And it passed, and then, as Chancellor Penny said, we came forth with a giant, and we appropriated $200,000 to support the giant, but at least we got it started in principle, which was really the important thing at that time. And then it's flowered as it has today. After that, I went to Washington after I was governor and unsuccessful candidate for United States Senate. I went to Washington. I worked for President Johnson, and I was an attorney in Washington. And I used to cast my eyes back at Massachusetts to see how Massachusetts was doing. And soon after, we had that recession during Governor Dukakis's first administration. But out of that recession, Massachusetts flowered. And I really consider that the investment that we made then in public higher education, certainly University of Mass at Amherst and all the other institutions I mentioned, but also particularly UMass Boston, which went out and met all of the students who wanted an education, which is really what this country stands for. You know, we have equal opportunity for everyone. And thereafter, your talents allow you to rise to the top like cream. And that's really what happened in Massachusetts for a period of time, and unless it continues to happen, as Senator Donahue says, we may be celebrating a requiem. The great natural resource of Massachusetts and New England is education. And if we pursue that, and if we recognize that and nail that banner on high, on the flagpole on high before every legislature and every governor too, we'll continue to be a great state. And if we don't, we're going to slip and fall. And I'm hopeful that those who are listening to this or see this videotape agree with us, because this was a commitment by politicians that had lots of other things on their mind, who were often slandered this way and that way, but recognized this great need. And I really felt a companionship in politics that exists to this day with these gentlemen around the table, and I'm hopeful that we can include in that those who are going to continue to vote for higher appropriations for our higher educational institutions, including Boston, University of Mass at Boston.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you, Governor. The remarks of the Governor and also the earlier remarks of Bob Quinn remind me that in the midst of the fight over the site, the university had the aid and counsel for a period, that is, say, the faculty, I guess, had the aid and counsel for a period of Pat Moynihan, who then was with the Joint Center for Urban Studies at Harvard, and later, of course, United States Center from New York.
And you delivered the main address at the convocation.
That is right. That's what I want to bring us to. We had a celebration installing John Ryan as the first chancellor of this institution, and Pat Moynihan and David Reisman and others took part in that, Arthur Schlesinger Jr. also. In the course of a seminar following the convocation and installation address, someone said to Pat Moynihan, what difference would it make to UMass Boston if we located it in, say, Quincy on the Wollaston Golf Course, or say Watertown on the site of the Arsenal. And Moynihan, as you know, profound thinker, thought about this for a while, and then he said, well, you'd have to change your name. Now, I'm also moved by the fact that two names have been mentioned here today as instrumental in the early life of this institution. I'd like to just bring them forward briefly, if I may. One is Father Walsh, who served as president of Boston College, and who in various ways gave his energies to the founding of this institution, and who served for a while as an aide to Bob Wood when Bob Wood was president of the University of Massachusetts. And the other is Bonnie Troy, who was appointed to the Board of Trustees by the governor here, and who served in that role with great distinction over a period, I think, of 20 years, and who died just a year ago. Should we have, at a future time, a session such as this devoted to the site, these two people could not, by reasons of fate, be there. But I suppose we'd want Judge Fox there.
I'm surprised he's not here. His ears must be burning.
The ubiquitous Judge Fox, yes. Now I would turn to Al Cella to see if he wants to add to this, and then I'd ask Leo Redfern about the hardships of getting all this started from an administrative point of view.
Thank you, Professor Brown and Chancellor Penny. I'm very humbled and pleased to be here today with this very distinguished group of good friends and pioneers in the development of the University of Massachusetts at Boston. I'm delighted also, of course, that my good friend Bob Quinn and others have alluded, Chubb Peabody have alluded to the great efforts of someone who is not with us today, of course, my old boss, John Forbes Thompson. You know, really, in many ways, and without detracting from the efforts of any of those who are here today, and I think what has been recited certainly comports with my recollection of the way in which this institution began and the efforts of many people to bring it about. Looming in the background of all of this effort is the striking presence of John Thompson. John, who has been much maligned and abused and misunderstood, had a real deep commitment to many issues, not the least of which was higher public education. And not only here for the University of Massachusetts in Boston, but of course also the enormous work he did for the university generally and University at Amherst. John used to refer to the university as the People's University. And I think in a very profound sense, he felt that this was one of the major obligations of state government and the state legislature to provide high-quality, low-cost education for students, citizens of Massachusetts who otherwise would not be able to obtain such necessary and essential education in order to further not only their own personal interests, but also the interests and the future of the state. And so there was never any question of his dedication and commitment to the notion once Senator Donahue, George Kenneally, Bob Quinn, Chubb Peabody, and others put forth this idea. There was never any question of John's wholehearted commitment and support. And I think that if we were all candid and frank, I think we would realize that had he taken a contrary position, this university would never come to exist today. It's precisely his behind-the-scenes support, his endorsement of the effort, his encouragement to Bob and to George and to Senator Donahue and others that really led to this, the passage of this legislation. And I think it really is a great tribute to someone who has been much neglected and much maligned over the years. He was absolutely unwavering in his devotion to higher public education, and this was manifest again and again in terms of his support of legislation which enabled the higher educational system in the Commonwealth in every segment to progress to the extent to which it has today. I'm reminded, and not to bring up old political wounds or battles, but it is very interesting that when we think about Governor Peabody referred to the fact that his legislative program, I don't know what the exact percentage is. Peter said 97%. I thought it was closer to 83 to 87%, but it's an inordinately high percentage for a governor to have his program passed in the legislature. And again, I think this is a great tribute to the dedication to the party and to the state of people like John Thompson. John was opposed initially for Speaker by Governor Peabody. This could have been the beginning of tremendous problems in terms of the governor's legislative program, or in terms of the operation of state government, the conflict between the executive and the legislative branch, or at least the House and the executive. And yet, after the battle was over and Thompson emerged again as Speaker, all of this was quickly buried. And indeed, he had a very simple conception of his role as Speaker of the House. In terms of his relationship with the governor of the same party, his job was to offer whatever advice and counsel he could on legislative matters to the governor. But once the governor made a decision, once the governor established a program, whether he agreed or disagreed with it, his job as Speaker was to see that that program was enacted. And I can know, for having been in the trenches on occasion after occasion, perhaps the best example is the capital punishment issue. John's brother was the chief of police and in Lederle. And John had never supported abolition of capital punishment. Governor Peabody got committed. John didn't think this was particularly wise, but this was part of the governor's program. And even while he was recuperating from illness at the Chelsea Soldiers' Home over one weekend, when the boat was going to come up on the following Monday or Tuesday, we were out there making phone calls, and he was calling around to garner support. And I don't think the capital punishment bill, we had 240 members of the House in those days. I had always been, when I was a member, had always been opposed to capital punishment. We were able to obtain never more than 60 votes to abolish capital punishment. My recollection is we either passed or came pretty close to passing it, and John Thompson had people voting for capital punishment because this was part of the governor's program, and he was committed to do all he could to enact that program. People who had never voted for capital punishment in their lives and never did again afterwards. So I think it's a great tribute not only to John, but I think to Governor Peabody, that they were able to work together, and indeed so successfully. I'm also struck by something that Bob Quinn said, and I think it is a very safe comment, pointing out the early friendships of many of the people here today who were politically involved. I came into the legislature in 1957 with the same class with George Kenneally and Bob Quinn. I knew Governor Peabody from way back from the old Middlesex County Young Democrats and meetings we used to hold over there in Harvard Square from time to time. I knew of the outstanding work and leadership of Maurice Donahue for the Democratic Party over the years. We were all socially and politically attuned and friends. I may add also, I think in terms of University of Massachusetts situation, not only here in Boston, but generally, I was particularly fortunate also in arriving on the scene after I left the legislature and worked for Speaker Thompson and then Speaker Quinn, Speaker Davern, and also Senate President Donahue. Very fortunate during the years in which he was very active at the University of Massachusetts to have gone to graduate school with my good friend Leo Redfern. We were both in the Literle Center of Public Administration at Harvard, which is now, of course, the Kennedy School. Both of us were commenting earlier, it was a hell of a better school when it was the Literle Center than it has now become. And we were very close friends in graduate school, and indeed had mutual respect. And I think that undoubtedly it was the Leo's efforts, Leo gathering all of the evidentiary facts and data and material that were necessary, that feeding it in, we were able to do the job of persuading when persuasion was necessary. And so I think that I consider myself indeed very, very fortunate. I've had the opportunity to serve in the legislature, then to the generosity and goodness of any number of people, speakers and the President of the Senate, who have been afforded the opportunity to continue to work in state government at the time, and to have had the association of people like Leo Redfern and the interests of the university. I consider myself very fortunate to have been in a position where we could play some small role in bringing about this, this great institution. And I share the fears and trepidation of many that, you know, it's very easy to forget. And I think people do forget the great struggles and the battles that went into the creation of this institution. It was not easy. And those who are here today can attest to and have attested to the difficulties that they encountered in creating this great institution. But I think it's so easy to forget, and many today do forget, the struggles and indeed the importance and significance of this institution. I think the vision of those who initially supported this, including my great lamented friend, John Thompson, this should be the People's University, that this would be the one institution in the entire state where those who had ability and talent and dedication but lacked the financial resources would be able to obtain a high-quality education to not only, again, for their own benefit, but for the future benefit of the state itself. I think, indeed, that vision has been more than realized and achieved, and yet it is not a vision which will flourish in the future unless we all attend to its continued cultivation and the continued realization of the importance and significance of this institution. So I join with those who are somewhat worried about the future of this institution. Perhaps it's enough to say, well, you know, looking back, it will survive, but I don't, it's not going to survive automatically, and it's not going to survive unless, indeed, there is leadership at the state level, both in the legislature and in the executive branch, leadership and appreciation of what this institution really means. And I think all we can do, those of us who no longer have an active role in government, is to try to recall the struggles, to impress upon those who do have active roles today, to the best we can, the importance and significance of this great institution, so that it will continue to grow and flourish in the future.
Thank you. Well, I'm going to ask Al Redfern now for his comments, and perhaps Marty Nolan and Ian Fleming, as neighbors from across the way,
Have you been
might want
promoted
some.
or demoted yet?
I don't know which.
Ian Fleming.
Oh, forgive me, forgive me. That would be a demotion, yes. Yes, Ian Menzies and Marty Nolan from our neighbors. The Globe might have some neighborly comment as well. I don't know. In any case, we'll turn to Leo Redfern.
Thank you. I think it's helpful to put a lot of what's been said into a historical perspective. And it's important to bear in mind that the early 60s were a time that John F. Kennedy also was inspiring the nation to stand above itself. And that spirit, I think, also existed in Massachusetts. I don't know where Maurice Donahue got the ideas, recommendations, suggestions, but he certainly synthesized a vision for a University of Massachusetts system that would be worthy of the Commonwealth and of benefit to its citizens. And it seems to me this vision comprised three components. The first was fiscal autonomy, so that the institution could do the job he and his colleagues wanted to assign it. The second was the University of Massachusetts at Boston to serve the largest metropolitan area and incidentally the state capital city of Commonwealth. And the third was the University of Massachusetts Medical School at Worcester in order to give Massachusetts youth an opportunity for medical education and also to turn out doctors to take care of the growing aging population which we see gathered around the table today. I think he succeeded with the help of his colleagues in achieving those goals, and this became a kind of seamless web of public higher education, certainly in the University of Massachusetts sense. I think the evolution of the fiscal autonomy bill set a pattern for the two subsequent legislations. At the time, as Senate Majority Leader, Maurice Donahue had set up a commission that reported favorably on this concept, and with a little help from Frank Boyden, all 5 feet 2 of them, throwing his arm around Johnny Power's 5'3" shoulders, we were very optimistic.
You could see eye to eye, Leo.
They saw eye to eye, neither one took it. The House was more of a dilemma for us. We didn't know what work was being done behind the scenes by Senator Donahue, George Kenneally, Kevin Harrington, and we're uncertain where to turn. J. John Fox, who was a trustee of the university at the time, introduced university administrators to hundreds of representatives. Remember, the House was much larger in those days. You know, Tip O'Neill has the saying, all politics are local, and J. John Fox must have an addendum to that, and all politicians are important. So we had to meet them individually, which I guess was good advice. Then I found out that my former classmate at the Lederle School was Al Cella, legal counsel to the Speaker, and went to him to plead our case and seek guidance in the House. And Al said, let's set up a meeting with the President and the Iron Duke. And it was about 10 minutes, and the President was presenting a very carefully prepared rationale and explanation of fiscal economy, and all of a sudden the Duke said, done. And we suddenly adjourned the meeting. And I'm sure the President had much more information he could have given the Speaker. And that set the pattern, so that when Senator Donahue, who had become Senate President, announced the idea of UMass Boston at a communion breakfast at the Newman Center in Amherst, the same kind of coalition of support, enhanced by an even more supportive George Kenneally this time, for the UMass Boston bill. And that also passed. And the UMass Medical School bill did run into more subvert opposition by some of the private institutions, but also...
Dean Berry was still alive, Leo.
Yeah, he was there.
He was there. Did manage to become enacted. Now, Speaker Quinn has explained about the site struggle, but if it's any assurance and comfort to Bob, this was really a maypole dance compared to the site of the medical school debate.
Sure was.
I think I was not at the meeting. It was so hush-hush that I had to let the President go in alone to the trustee meeting while the Speaker spoke to the board. But I imagine the advantages outlined included the fact that this particular section of the city could derive some strengthening from a cultural institution. It would enhance what was a problem area in housing. Nearby, it had access to public transportation, both MTA and roads, and it was in the environs of the city. And so the trustees, I'm sure persuaded by the logic of this approach, agreed and chose this site. This resolved a lot of difficulties, as Tom remembers, because the site really hinged on what was the philosophy going to be for this institution. And it ranged from a Sylvian campus with ivy-covered walls and lilac bushes and gladiolas out around McLean Hospital, to a scattering of storefronts across the city of Boston.
With TV monitors.
Yeah, kind of a mini supermarket. We'd call them convenience stores today, I guess, which would have caused a lot of administrative problems, although it was a very innovative educational idea. So that got resolved. As to the being chairman of the task force on UMass Boston, I really have to confess, I don't want to go to my grave with this secret. It really wasn't that much of a job because there was a great deal of initiative and enthusiasm and excitement by those people involved. Faculty were willing to run the place if the administrators weren't interested, and even students seemed to be enthused about this new institution. The one problem was to get temporary quarters while the Columbia Point site was designed and constructed. And we started with the old gas building, then across the street was at the Armory, the Boston Armory, and several adjacent buildings. And thank goodness the Columbia Point site had been chosen because the battle zone was creeping up from Washington to Tremont Street towards Park Square, where the gas building was. And you could envision a clash of cultural values versus entertainment values.
College kids don't do that sort of thing, do they?
Well, history had never seen a battle of students versus sex. And in some ways, it was a shame we missed what the outcome would have been. But
They call it the combat zone.
the combat zone, yeah. I think that this isn't the time to go into the medical school situation. We'll have to have more patience for that at a later time. But it seems to me that some of the challenges facing UMass Boston are the fiscal pressures that has been mentioned, not just alluded to, been mentioned explicitly to be a problem. But that is also, I think, a surface manifestation of a more underlying problem, which is the kind of me first and what's in it for me attitude that seems more prevalent in contemporary society than it was in those days. We had, as you've already noted, people from private institutions, people from across the Commonwealth supporting this because it was a good idea. They felt this was another way that society could move forward, even though it might in one sense or another not be beneficial particularly to their immediate personal interests. But it was something that they felt the public at large needed and deserved. We don't see so much of this kind of spirit. And maybe before the fiscal thing can be fully straightened out, there has to be some kind of a renaissance or resurgence in the attitude of more people in the public about what are the important priorities in their life. And the final one, to end on a real dismal note, is the danger in any large organization of
Bureaucratization.
Bureaucratization. Thank you, Councillor. Yeah.
It's a good Litauer word.
Good Litauer phrase. I'm forgetting it after all these years. But you know, you have boards of trustees with presidents and chancellors and presidents, and then boards of regents with chancellors.
Yeah, chancellors.
Chancellors.
Four of them.
Four of them.
That's what they're proposing.
And a secretary of education that was put in place after I left. And all this, I don't know how well that facilitates the job of providing opportunity to people, particularly young people, but not exclusively, and improving the educational process. And so those are the kinds of challenges I think Chancellor Penny and her staff and the faculty and even the more active students here at UMass Boston must look at and hopefully solve in the years ahead. And I wish you every good luck in such an undertaking.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Leon. Marty, you have any comments?
Well, Tom, I'm going to yield most of my time to Ian Menzies because he was really involved in this more than any other newspaper man, I think.
Mm-hmm.
In the city room at the Globe in the early 60s, we said, are these two Ians ever going to let us up? So we had Ian Foreman covering education, Ian Menzies covering science, and together they amounted to an Ian Fleming character. 007, License to Kill. They really kept at this issue of what Bob Morris, Governor Peabody, George realized that the need for public higher education was pressing. Now, I myself am an alumnus of Boston College, took the subway out 4 years. Father Mike Walsh, God rest his soul, said I gave him more gray hairs by the writings in the school's newspaper, The Heights, than he deserved to get. So you're not the only one, Bob. And at the Globe, there was no constituency for higher education because all the top people went to Harvard and all the sort of operational people went to BC, you know, and there was no real constituency for it. So Ian and Ian went to work and wrote these long series of articles, which I think John Thompson read, and Johnny Powers and Mossy and others, and it was...
Indeed, there wasn't a week that went by that I tried to read some of them, and many times I understood them. They were excellent articles, and every time you
Well, you see, Governor, that Finley Peter Dunn, Mr. Dooley defined the job of the newspapers. We're supposed to comfort the afflicted and to afflict the comfortable. And I think that's what these articles did. I was in Washington during much of the early time of this great institution, but I got to know Bob Wood, whose portrait is on the wall there, and he was Undersecretary and later Secretary of HUD, which was then involved in housing, not scandals. And he came back here and was president of UMass. And I remember the newly elected governor, Michael Dukakis, spent a lot of time measuring his wall-to-wall carpet in his office. I think Governor Dukakis' attitudes towards public higher education were betrayed a couple of years ago when he said in an interview in the Globe, he said, now this is not Berkeley, you know, aha. And we said, why not? I mean, and that, I'm afraid, is not just the budget cutbacks are serious enough, but I think the attitude that a university is just like a larger community college is something that is an unfortunate legacy of the Dukakis era. And
I'm surprised you didn't see that in 1975 when he froze the funds.
I think we ought to skip any references to present politicians. This is a testimony to those of us that had some great thought and sight. Please, let's not get into this.
I'll tell you,
no offense.
There's nothing more bracing than to be in the company of 5 politicians who still speak passionately and aren't worried about what some talk show guy is going to say about it. So I'm proud to be here and to be in the company. And I yield to Ian.
Well, I guess I may have a little more here than Marty, but I go back a little longer. I really think you should feel proud. I really, all of you, because it's forgotten really what we went through at that time. And I have a couple of memories that go back into the 50s, because that's when it really started. And one is sort of bad from your point of view, and the other is all good. And the bad was, you remember when we started with Paul Mather? I can remember with some pride, Marty, and you'll understand this, and some embarrassment. I think I wrote a page 1 story on Mather when we were trying to get some money for UMass that was virtually an editorial but ran on page 1, which was the only time we really did that.
Is that different?
Different now.
I said the only time, Bob, I think I did that. But I'm proud of it in a way because it had to be said, and I think it was sort of a turning point. And I think that was 1958, wasn't it, John, when Mather resigned?
The turning point was when we drove him out.
Okay, okay.
If you remember the great quote.
See, I knew I could get that going.
There was a lawyer that Chubb made the judge in my hometown by the name of Mike Donahue. Very active in the UMass alumni. So he thought he'd do something for the university, and he invited the Duke and myself to dinner at his house with Mather. Yeah. So we spent about 4 hours going over what we thought the university should be doing and so forth. And not too long after that, Mather made that famous quote that the combined brains of the legislature would fit on the head of a pen. And that was the end of him.
Well, it was the beginning of us, in the sense that it waked us up. It really did. And that's what I wanted to say. It made us realize what was going on at UMass, or what wasn't going on. I'm still talking about Amherst at the time. But I think to really put it a little bit in focus from a press view, what nobody has said is, how did this begin? And it really began because as we came out of World War II and were having kids, we were wise enough to realize, how are we going to put these kids through school? And I'm talking now from a newspaper point of view. How are we going to do it? And it's the same thing is actually occurring here, but we were the baby boomers. I mean, we were the parents of the baby boomers. So it was a little bit easier to do it, and I think that's part of the climate which really made it possible. And I can remember talking with Dr. Lederle at one point after we had done one of several series, I guess, and said, if you want to continue, we thought, in our humble way, if you want to continue to get money from the legislature, you've got to do one of two things. You've either got to have the winningest football team in the nation, or you've got to come to Boston or the university. And you happen to share the same view at the time. And we kept on that theme of UMass needing a university in Boston. Because, and there was one other factor, I don't know whether you recall this, some of you, but at the early time, in Boston in general, and I think as Bob was referring to those Irish kids, a lot of people thought UMass Amherst not only was an Aggie college, but was a Masonic lodge in the western part of the state. And that's something that had to be changed. And what we did was we started polling around Boston and found, of course, that kids from Southie and everywhere else wanted to get out there. They were having the same problems that we anticipated, is how were you going to pay for school? So I really think that was really one of the key things of trying to, at the Globe in our efforts to try to promote education. This has been a long time. I just wanted to add that because vested interests are a big part of what we do, and I think that was part of the reason. I think the same vested interests really are occurring today, but now it's really even more different. There's a national need for education, and especially in the urban centers. And we've got the Japanese, the West Germans. They're doing everything. George, you mentioned Russia. But one thing I noticed in Russia is they've got a hell of a sight better train service than we do in this country. They really do. There are a lot of things we could learn. Right, and so that was part of that story, and I'm going to close with that. Thank you. Very good.
Mr. Presiding Officer, I'm going to run off, but I want to mention one crowd that I think was omitted. As I recall, in establishing the university here, Dr. Lederle was much like St. Ignatius, sending his Jesuits out all over the world, except that he sent out about a dozen, John Ryan one of them, and you mentioned Barney, our friend Barney Troy, I think, not his middle name, but his last name should have been UMass. And George Goodwin, I think, was one of them. And I think you're part of that. And those people who were willing to come out of the sylvan, ivy-clad buildings there at Amherst and come down here and wrestle with the scruffy kids. Cow barn? Yes, from the cow barns. Come down here and wrestle with the scruffy city kids were wonderful, and we owe them a tremendous debt. And thank you for sending your missioners in the right direction.
The Cardinal was out getting an honorary degree, and I was showing him around the campus. This would be around 1966 or 67.
There was only one Cardinal, of course.
And after he looked it over, and I don't think he'd ever seen it before, he said, when our boys come out from Boston, I don't think they'll ever come back.
Well, a lot of them haven't. They're all over the country and the world. Tribute to you, sir.
I think one of the most significant parts of this meeting today is to find out that my good friend of long, long standing is a Crusader. And I didn't know it until today.
With a Boston College degree.
I kept it hidden.
Well, that's something Morris never.
Well, I think unless there are others, we've been at this some time. Speaking for myself, I certainly have enjoyed this and profited from it. I trust you have as well. And now I turn us back over to the Chancellor again.
Well, just a wonderful thanks from my vantage point as a relative newcomer. I've only been here a year, and I chose it to be Chancellor here because I thought it was one of the most exciting institutions in the entire United States. And I think you've confirmed that today, and we'll do everything we can to keep your vision there and to make it go forward.
And I think you're doing a wonderful job.
Thank you.
On my behalf, for this lovely gift, I'm going to give you a gift also in order to compete with the former chairman of your board. I'm going to give you a painting of myself. Hang up on the wall next to him.
Good. Okay. Thank you.
I've been looking for a dartboard.
Thanks for coming. It was wonderful to meet you all. Thanks a lot. It was wonderful. Okay. Well, we'll get together again sometime. Thanks, Bob. Thank you very much.
If you ever...
Yeah, I have to get to court, so I better run.
Yeah, get to court.
Forums.